What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Greg Orme, who has been researching possible Martian artifacts since 1993. Now, he was the discoverer of the crowned face and other possible artifacts in the King's Valley on Mars. He wrote a book on this subject, Why We Must Go to Mars, the King's Valley. Now, he co-authored a peer-review paper on the Martian spiders in the Journal of British Interplanetary Society and discovered the spider image and introduced them to Arthur C. Clarke. He has 3 peer-review papers in the recent Mars issue of the Journal for Space Exploration. Greg Orme, welcome to the show.
Yes, hi.
It's great to have you on all the way from Australia.
Yes, Brisbane, Australia.
Brisbane, Australia. What's the weather like there right now?
I think it just started to rain as you mentioned that, so I guess you jinxed me.
We're bringing some of that.
Hope we don't get a thunderstorm now.
Yeah, bringing some of that English weather over there. Yeah. Oh no, it's great to have you on, and this is going to be a fascinating interview about Martian artifacts. But just before we get into the crux of it as well, just a few questions I really want to ask you. Now you've been getting into this seriously since 1993, is that right?
Yeah, about then. Yeah.
Yeah. What got you into it initially?
Well, it's a funny sort of thing, you know. Like, who knows why people get into things? You know, the internet was getting a bit better, and I started looking around online, and some people were looking at these things, and also I realised that you could look at these free images of Mars, you know, with the orbiter that was orbiting Mars at the time, the Mars orbital camera, And I just got entranced with it, basically, with having an interest in space, to actually be able to look at another planet and see all these wonderful images, and I realised that people were looking for possible artifacts there, and I guess it's a sort of a case where you don't know it couldn't be done, and so you go ahead and just do it. You just go around looking. People say to you, well, there can't be anything on Mars; it's impossible, and you've got the images there, so you just have a look, And so I just kept doing it and started finding interesting things, and it went on from there.
It's so true what you say. About I mean, space just fascinates me. I'm always, when I can get chance, watching the NASA channel, because it's a free live streaming channel through Ustream on the internet. It's global. But I always do think to myself, how much truth are they actually telling us of what they know?
Well, I'm not really a conspiracy person. I tend to sort of think a lot like a mainstream sort of scientific person, strangely enough, which is kind of odd that I'm doing this, But I really got into it just looking at these pictures. And to be honest, a lot of the things that I thought I found in the early days were nonsense, People get caught in the same sort of silly ideas, when they do this. And I notice even people today, they start looking at these things and they get caught in the same traps that I did. One is, when there's too much compression in an image, it gets very blocky. You've probably seen that in a JPEG image, and a face can look very blocky. But if you're looking at a Martian landscape with the JPEG compression, it looks like there's buildings there, because you've got these little squares,
Yeah, absolutely.
And people get caught, and they still get caught, And if they look too closely, they find they're just looking at the pixels, and they're starting to see these little shapes that are really just amalgamations of little pixels. So you have to be very careful not to look at tiny things in Martian images, because there's just too much distortion. And plus there's coincidences. There's simply just, if you keep looking at enough pictures, you'll see a lot of strange things. If you look at clouds for long enough, you'll see all sorts of funny faces and castles in the sky, and so you have to sort of be able to be a bit humble about it and realise that you might have thought you've discovered something and it's just not. It's just nothing, And you've got to enjoy really just looking at the geology and all of the other things. And if you find something good, well, so much the better, That's the way I looked at it.
No, absolutely. And just your background as well. What is it you were doing at the time when you were getting into this? I mean, what is your sort of trade in a sense?
Well, I'm basically a network engineer, So I'm not a planetary scientist and things. So I suppose with all the amount that I did on this, I could have become an astronomer, because
so true.
I published a paper on these formations on Mars called the Martian spiders. And that got into a peer-reviewed journal. I wrote that with a geologist, and so that was kind of interesting. I got to know Arthur C. Clarke very well at the time, because he saw my pictures online and he thought they were plants on Mars because they look very much like plants. These things, these things that look like trees, And so then he got interested, and then he started telling everyone, well, this guy's discovered these plants on Mars, and he was just about to address the UN about it, believe it or not. It terrified me, I was talking to him by email, and he said, I'm doing this address to the United Nations, because he's a very famous man at one point, And I talked him out of it, because I said, look, don't mention this, It's...
Wow.
But he
I can't believe you knew him.
I didn't really want to oppose on his ideas, but he was a very smart man.
Yeah, and where was he living? Was he living in Australia?
Oh, that was no, he was living in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, right? Yes, sorry, yeah, But you became quite. You would class him as a bit of a friend in the end.
Yes, I got to know him very well. I wrote to him a lot and conversed with him nearly every day, and he actually put himself down as a co-author of this paper on Martian spiders that we did.
That's incredible.
And yes, he was very much into the prediction side of things. He liked to sort of think that he'd sort of written a book that foresaw in some way things that might happen. And he wrote about plants on Mars in a book called The Sands of Mars. And I think he was looking for some validation of that original idea, because this was before the Mariner spacecraft, and before they went there and showed Mars as basically lifeless, and everyone assumed that there was all these plants there and even people, So he went back to the time when people actually thought that.
That's really honourable that you got to have that connection with him, and thanks for sharing that story about him. That's really cool that you got to meet him. You never met him face to face, but you got to get to know him through. Did you ever speak to him by the phone or?
No.
Was it all by email?
He was a very interesting guy. He claimed to have invented the internet. I don't know if you ever heard that story.
No, I didn't. No. Wow. Okay. Well,
he said that Tim Berners-Lee told him that it was a story that he wrote that inspired Tim Berners-Lee to invent the concept of the internet. And he wrote this little story, and if you go back to his short stories, he wrote this thing about this big phone network all over the earth, and they were gradually, I think, computerizing it, and then they were talking about what if it became sentient, and then all these phones started ringing like it had become alive, And for some reason, apparently, Tim Berners-Lee read this story and thought of this vast network of phones and making it with computers instead. So that's what he told me, So I'm sure he told other people the same story, but that was kind of showed what a visionary he was.
Very, very interesting. Now, getting on to Mars as well, because that's what this interview is going to head towards.
Sure.
How much have we explored Mars? We've not explored the whole planet, have we? I mean, this is a huge planet, isn't it?
Well, originally the Viking probes took a lot of pictures of Mars, and they were very low resolution. And that was originally in the 70s when the Cydonia face was first discovered. And a lot of people thought that was going to be a lot more impressive than it turned out to be. And then after that, they sent another probe there called the Mars Orbital Camera, or the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and it took pictures of all these different areas. And when it took pictures of Cydonia, all of a sudden it appeared to be not really a face at all, and that people had sort of just fooled themselves. And they call it pareidolia is the actual technical term they use when people just see faces in clouds. And they claim that people have this innate tendency to just see faces and animal shapes just in random objects because it's an evolutionary trait, And this is how they just tend to dismiss the whole subject, that it can't possibly be true because people are just imagining it, And then they sent another probe recently called HiRISE, and HiRISE has been mapping the whole of Mars, and I think it's done about 99% of it in a low resolution format. And then there's high resolution images which get down, I think, to I can't remember, I think it's something like 20 or 30 centimeters a pixel, which is very, very tiny, And if you were looking down at the Earth with that kind of resolution, you'd be able to see individual cars. You might even see their windscreens, So you're starting to get some pretty serious mapping being done on Mars.
And where are those pictures in relations where are those high quality pictures in relations to your work then as well?
Well, I use them as well. I'm going to be going through them. See, when you're doing something like this, there's a lot of things you have to do to avoid fooling yourself. That you convince yourself that something's real. And one important way to do that is you try to make predictions. That you can look at a picture and you think, well, if they ever re-image this, I'm predicting that this will become clearer. It'll become more face-like, not less face-like. And quite often when people see these things, they assume that when it's re-imaged that there's wonderful things going to be seen. And very often when it is re-imaged, the thing just isn't there anymore because it was just a trick of the light and the shade, And this has happened many, many times to people, And looking back, you can realise how the eye has sort of connected the dots and made this sort of fanciful shape that didn't really exist, So that happened with the Kings Valley because it wasn't visible in the Viking images, but in the Mars orbital camera, it became visible, and that's when I found this in July 2000. So this is like 16 years ago now, which is quite incredible when you think of what this might be, that 16 years has gone by.
Well, yeah. Sorry, is there more you want to
And
add?
then
Go ahead.
Well, a few years ago, they re-imaged the Kings Valley in parts with the high-rise camera with this much greater resolution. And then a lot of these features, it became a test as to whether they were still there or not. And in some of the things that looked a bit like faces under the high imagery, they just dissolved into random nothingness, and so they weren't there at all, which was a good thing, because you need some sort of like baseline to see how accurate your predictions are being, you know. But for the main crown faces there, the re-imaging was incredible with the extra features it showed, and so many people believe it more or less proved that it is artificial, you know. Which is what I have to prove in this video, you know.
Absolutely, and we're just about to get into it as well. We are. I keep saying that, but just one question that's popped to mind is, well, why hasn't NASA got a department that's dealing with the subjects that we're about to touch upon, and that's you know, being interviewed about the subjects that we're about to touch upon? Don't you find that a bit strange?
Well, I always felt it was strange, you know. Like I thought it was strange in the 90s when I was looking at these things, and then NASA wasn't paying much attention. But I don't know. I don't have a good explanation for it. I think eventually they will.
But
and I have a lot of respect for NASA and a lot of respect for the mainstream science, you know.
But they can't be off knowing what you've discovered potentially. I mean, what we're saying, we're brushing it off, aren't we? So easy, as though, yeah, well, they you'd think they know, but really that's so easy to brush it off that way. There's a cover up. There must be, and the cover up in the sense that they either don't want to look at it, or they do know about it, and they're not going to talk about it until they've got conclusive evidence.
A lot of people have had conspiracy theories about this kind of thing. Some people think they're already there, you know, looking at it, that there's secret bases on Mars. I don't believe any of that sort of thing, you know, but who knows, really? I just try and look at the evidence, but I've never seen any real evidence of NASA hiding anything or avoiding re-imaging things, you know. If you made an application for a re-imaging, and you can do that, the public can do that, you can actually ask for these things to be re-imaged, and they've done it, you know. I mean, they could have just ignored it if they wanted to hide it and not re-imaged it. They could have ignored this whole area, and we would have never had any new images of it, you know.
Well, maybe it's easier for other people to let the truth out in a sense, rather than for them to disclose it. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe.
I think it's that they're just very skeptical. You know,
Yes.
There's two aspects to it. One is I think they're just very skeptical that they consider this a bit like a fringe idea, and people tend to shy away from it.
Sure.
Another is that there was a bit of a song and dance that went on with this. And I think it became a bit toxic to NASA. They figured that there were wild claims being made, and if they tried to look into it, you know, they just would have looked like a fringe sort of endeavour themselves. So they sort of just backed away from it. I think, you know. Well, unfortunately, I think that's what the real thing is. You know.
That's an interesting answer. Thank you for that. That's a very interesting answer. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, well, let's get into your work then, in what you've been discovering over these years. Now, we're going to put a number of slides on the screen, and I think you've got those slides in front of you, of course, and we're going to talk around what you've discovered.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I'll just go to slide 1, and you should be able to see that on your screen there. Okay, well, that just basically says the Kings Valley, Mars. The name is an obvious enough name, basically, because the main face there is the crown face, and it evokes an image of sort of ancient Egypt to a lot of people, and the crown and the pharaohs and that sort of thing. And so with multiple faces in this one small area. The natural name is just the King's Valley from the King Face. The original name was the King Face. I think I came up with the name King Face. But after that, there was a fellow, Tom Van Flandern, who was associated with it, and he suggested that some people thought it was more female-looking than male, and so instead of calling it the Queen Face or something, they just came to call it the Crown Face. And plus, if you're talking about aliens, you don't really know if they even had sexes,
So this was discovered by you in July 2000, then?
That's right, yeah. So I'll go to slide 2 now anyway. Slide 2 just basically says you can read the book for free. You just go to my website that's got the link. And I read the book. My approach to this has always been to try to prove whether it's artificial or not. A lot of people don't really try to do that. They just try and present evidence and say, well, maybe this is true, and then maybe this and maybe that. But I work on this thing in science called falsification. And in logic, there's a thing called excluded middle logic, which means a thing is either true or it's false. It can't be both true and false at the same time, And so this can either be artificial or not. I mean, there are either some artificial structures in this valley or there are not. There's no in the middle. That's what they mean by excluded middle logic. So the way they often try to prove things in logic and in science is they use this thing called falsification, where you can't prove that it's artificial, but you can prove the other explanations don't work, and that's how I approach it, So in the book, and people can read it for themselves, I assume the artificiality is proven, and then I go on to the next step and I say, well, what happens next, and how would you organise an expedition and all of this sort of thing, And another important thing, and this is probably one of the most important things, is that there's nothing scary about any of this. I noticed a lot of people when they start reading about this, they start thinking it's like UFOs or things like that, But there's nothing about this that's anything like that. Well, I don't believe there is anyway. These structures, if they exist, they must be extremely old. And when I say old, they must be so old that they date back to the time where there was only a bacteria in Earth's oceans. There weren't even plants. There wasn't algae. There were no animals. Nothing. And so it's quite likely that whoever was there, they died out that long ago, and obviously they haven't come back. So I mean, you can look at it like an archeological expedition, like ancient Egypt, but you don't think that the pharaohs are going to rise up out of their sarcophagi and chase people around, And it's the same with this. It's very unlikely that there's anything remotely scary about it all, So I think that's very important to appreciate, because people need to look at it in a very objective way. But if they start getting fearful about aliens and things, well, that presents problems, So anyway, I'll move to slide 3. So you can read the book. Slide 2 has basically got a link when they can read the book for themselves. And slide 3's got a picture of the crown face, and that's, I think, the original picture from 2000. And when you see it, it's quite visually impressive, isn't it?
It is. I was quite taken aback by it, to be honest with you. I've gone a bit further into the research than we are now, by reading some of your papers. But
there's very few people look at that and just dismiss it. Very, very few people are able to do that, And even in those days, they actually did a Fox News special on it. I think in about 2001.
Is that right?
We did a press conference in which this was mentioned, and this got into the newspapers, and it was on Good Morning America. It was in the New York Post. I think it was in the Times in England. It was on some British television, and went right around the world. It was like a sensation. You probably didn't see much about it. But a lot of people really were taken with this image, and this one particularly. And then Fox were doing this show on UFOs, and they included the second half of the show. They included about this, So
it's impressive. It really is, Greg.
Yes. So that was important in a way, because it gave a sort of a proof that a lot of people thought it was very, very, it had a lot of credence, and because sometimes you can talk to skeptics and they say, oh, I can't see anything, but it proved in those days that a lot of people did see it, and that was very important, because it's very easy to convince yourself that something's there, and then you show other people and they don't see anything, but I mean, everybody sees this, I think, pretty much. So anyway, I suppose we're running short of time too.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We have got to be conscious of time. Just very quickly, very quickly, being conscious of time as well. When they re-image this image, in the sense that this image is going to come from a high resolution camera that's taken it, is that imminent? Has that already been done? It's being processed?
Oh, that's already happened. That's part of the presentation I'm going to show you. Okay. And if you look at this image in slide 3, and you look at the eyes, and the nose and things like that.
Yes.
All of those are re-imaged in it with about at least 10 times higher resolution, and you can get into the pupils and see the folds around the eye and things, and they're much clearer and much harder to explain.
How big is this?
How big is what? Yeah, I think it's a few kilometers long, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Impressive. Okay.
Okay. Slide 4. Just some points that I try to make. It's a bit of a tangent, perhaps, but I've never considered this to be a fringe subject. If I saw a show about this, I would never consider this to be a fringe scientific topic. I just think it's mainstream science, particularly in these days, because now you have SETI are basically saying they expect to find civilizations on other worlds that could be quite nearby. I think that's much more scary than this, and so if it's possible that civilizations like that could exist near us, then it's not that ridiculous that someone could have come here and tried to terraform Mars, and do that. I mean, it's no less improbable in my eyes,
And then the question is, did they then come and terraform Earth?
Well, this is a theory in the book, that we look like them because we have the DNA of the original terraforming, And I go into the book of how they might have tried to terraform Mars at the time, that we might be an alien colony, that doesn't really affect us now, It just means that 3 or 4 billion years ago, someone seeded either Mars or the Earth or both, with some DNA, and it slowly evolved, and that meant that we don't have 3 eyes, we have 2 eyes, and so we look like this face,
Okay.
In which case there could be a lot of other planets out there that were also seeded like this.
But with what you're doing, it's really concentrating on just the structures and the evidence that you've gathered. So yeah.
Yes. Well, what I'm really trying to do is try to prove that it is artificial, and then all these other ideas follow from there. But if you can't prove that it's artificial, then it's just all hypothetical suppositions, and this is a problem you get into with some UFO theories. If you can't prove that there are UFOs, and there may or may not be, I don't know, then you can't really go on from there. But if you can prove that this is artificial, then a lot of these ideas become very obvious, and you thought of it yourself, that maybe they seeded the Earth as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So, slide 5 is. So I'm trying to prove that. I'm not trying to prove that all of these things are artificial. I'm just trying to prove that one part of one thing is artificial, because that's all you really need to do.
Dan,
you don't have to.
Give you a call
lot
back,
of these things might end up being random and just by coincidence they just happen to be next to this, So that's the objective, and that's very important to understand that, that people might see some of these things and they think, well, that's probably nothing, and it might very well be nothing, but that's not the point,
No.
So, and I try to I try to work out some sort of statistical analysis, which is very difficult to do because these faces are all very different from each other, and they don't lend very well to using statistics, and this was a big problem for me and a lot of people in SPSR that look at these things. So I came up with this rough way of sort of working it out, that each match has an odds of 10 to 1, and so I came up with this figure of 10 to the power of 268 to 1, which is 1 followed by 268 zeros. Now that's about the same odds as winning lotto every week for 35 weeks in a row. So it's very unlikely, you know.
Sure.
Now, I don't know if that's how accurate that is, but it does indicate that it is very unlikely, you know, and that's the main point. So okay, we'll move on to slide 6 now, and this is a kind of an obvious point. We don't need to dwell on too much, but I don't think there are many people who really need to feel threatened by this, and a lot of people will end up making money out of it, I think, because if we do have to go to Mars and create colonies to look at these things, then for a lot of people who love space, you know, this is everything they ever wanted, was colonies on Mars, you know. I mean, some of your descendants, you know, or children or relatives might even end up living on Mars because of this, you know. So it's not a bad thing, you know. It's not like we're going to go there and we're going to find some aliens and they're going to rise up like zombies and things like that, you know. It's just we're going to go there, and I think we're going to find ruins, and there's going to be a mystery, and that'll draw us into going there. And so we'll end up going into space much sooner than we otherwise would. And that's what I think is one of the most wonderful things about it, you know. Some people say, well, even if we did find these things on Mars, maybe we wouldn't go, we wouldn't look, you know. And I always reply to that. No one, if you read a science fiction book and they said, well, they found alien ruins on Mars, and then they didn't bother going to look at them, you know, you throw the book away as being too silly to read, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it in a fictional context, you know, or if you look at the movie 2001 and they found an artifact, and then in the movie they just said, well, we found this artifact, but there were these other rocks on the other side of the moon that we found more interesting, so we didn't bother checking the artifact out, you know. I mean, no one would believe this, you know. So, I mean, this is why I believe that we would naturally go and check these things out, because I don't think people in a fictional context would take the idea of not going seriously, you know.
Right.
So,
okay.
Okay. Now, in slide number 7, I'm just making the point that pareidolia is when people see faces in clouds, that sort of thing, you know, and you have to have a way to differentiate from that. And the way you do it is, if you can prove that these things are very similar to each other, that there's some sort of model or theory where the same sort of themes or motives are being repeated over and over, then that proves it's less random, you know. But if you found like 20 faces on Mars and they all look completely different from each other, then it could be just like faces in clouds, because if you looked at faces in clouds, you might see 20 faces there over time and they'll look nothing like each other. But if you saw the same face in a cloud 20 times, then you wouldn't believe it was just random, you know. So that's the basis of how I'm trying to prove this. And I'm trying to show that basically whoever did this, they really had the same model of a face and they just repeated it, you know. And there's very little difference, and that's the basis of the idea. Okay, so I'll move on to slide 8 now. Now, I'm trying to disprove the geological hypothesis that these things are random and created naturally. And when you start to think about what does created naturally mean, it really just means that the wind and the rain, if there was any rain, ran down the cliff face, and the wind blew on it, and somehow these faces have just eroded and popped up, you know. And when you start to think of it in those terms, it can quickly become absurd, because we don't see this sort of thing happening on Earth, you know. I mean, usually what the wind does, it'll just create a smooth cliff, or the rain will just create something smooth. It doesn't actually create complex shapes, you know. And this is what they call falsifying a scientific theory. And Karl Popper was one who came up with that idea, that if you can't prove that something is wrong, then it's just a belief. It's not a real scientific statement. So the idea that these things are natural is what they call a null hypothesis in science, which means that it's just random, and you have to try and disprove the randomness hypothesis, and then that's what I try and do. So I'll just move on to number 9 now. This is a bit of a strange topic, but I have a friend who's a physicist, and he really got it when I explained it this way. There's a thing called entropy in science, in physics, and entropy just means disorder. So it shows a picture of some bricks, and then they're very orderly, all stacked on top of each other, and then the disorder is when they all fall over, and then they're all randomly sort of mixed up. Now, as disorder increases, entropy increases. That's what entropy means. It's just a fancy word that means disorder. And so over time, they say entropy increases, which means disorder increases. So that's another way of saying that erosion will gradually get rid of any repeated patterns. So, which you can see all the time yourself. After the rain, you might see mud in a garden or something, and the rain will just wash away any sort of patterns that are there, and it'll all just become featureless and more random looking. Do you understand what I mean?
I think so, yep.
So what the basic thing is that the more repeated patterns there are, the less random something is. It means the same thing to say a repeated patterns is not random as it is to say when something is random that there's no repeated patterns. That's all entropy means in this sort of case, So if you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again, it just means that it's not random, If you went to a casino and you threw dice and the same numbers kept coming up over and over and over, you wouldn't think that was random, would you,
No, of course not.
And that's because the similarities, the same numbers are coming up, and that's the similarity. So that's basically what it means here. Okay, so I'll keep moving. There's a thing called degrees of freedom, and some people might not understand this. If someone who's a statistician, they might understand this better. That when you compare, say, two faces to say that they're the same face, then there's a thing called degrees of freedom, which means that each part of the face has to match the other face. So the left eye has to be the same on both faces, the right eye has to be the same, the nose has to be the same, the mouth has to be the same, the crown has to be the same, the chin has to have the same length. These are all degrees of freedom because each of those could be something else. You understand what I mean? Okay. So you might have on one face you have a left eye, and on the other face there's no eye. Or it might have a nose there, or it might have a mouth where an eye should be, or it might just have a river flowing down there or something like that. And so that's the idea that when something matches, there's a lot of other things that could have been there, but when there's another eye, that is in itself is unlikely. You understand? So every time something matches, it shouldn't have matches, and in statistics they call that a degree of freedom, So, and you've probably seen this normal curve, and basically on the edges of a normal curve, it really means the same thing to say that things are more similar to each other on the edge of the normal curve, and in the middle of the normal curve, that just means that things are random and they're not similar to each other. So there's more disorder in the middle. And on the edges of the normal curve, that's when things become ordered and become similar to each other. So we'll just get to number 13 now. Now this is it might have seemed like I had to go into a lot of things, but I think it's very important to understand what I'm trying to do here, because I noticed a lot of people they didn't really get the idea of the similarity process and how important it was in terms of trying to prove something. Now this shows an area to the left of the main crown face, and part of the theory in the book is that there's another face here, and I've outlined this on the right to show where this face is, and it's very similar in some ways to the crown face. It has a nose, it has two eyes, it has a chin, but a lot of this is very highly eroded, and so the prediction. The innate prediction here is that if we looked at this area more closely, we should see more face-like features appear in the high-rise re-imaging. Okay, so in slide 14, I overlay the two faces. So the main crown face is now overlaid on this particular area. And when the two features are combined, this whole new face pops out. And I used two levels of transparency there, which means that one face is more transparent than the other. And so you can see that it looks very, very much like a face now. And that's because some of the features in this face, which I call face 1, are matching so closely with the face on face 2 that it just creates this this very clear feature. And then when I run this movie, I'll just run this little movie, and I'll just run it here to show myself. The little movie is showing a morphing from one face to another. And if you look at this movie, it just moves very, very gradually from one to the other. And many of the features don't move at all, which means that they match very closely. And this is what I mean about degrees of similarity, because, degrees of freedom, because the eyes match closely, the nose match closely, and any of those things could have been completely different, and that would have been very easy to see in the video if they were different. But very few of them are, you know. Okay. Slide 15 we'll go on to now. Now, in slide 15, I'm showing the similarities between these two chins. If face 1 is on the left and face 2 is on the right, and if you look at where I've got A and B on there, that they're the same lines, that it's like someone was repeating this same face and it had the same basic chin with the same lines on it. And part of the pattern that appears to happen with this is the faces are partially overlaid on each other. So sometimes they might share an eye. The left eye of one face is the right eye of another, or it sort of overlaps slightly onto the other face. And I assume this was some kind of artistic idea. But the sheer number of similarities seems to prove that it is intentional. It's not just some random thing, because as you can see, the chins match there. And I assess this at 10 to 1 against chance. Now in slide 16, I show that the edge of the crown on this face 2, the main crown face, is pretty much the same as the left edge of the crown on face 1. So basically, I go through in the book in a lot more detail, but basically they both have very, very similar shaped crowns in many, many different ways, you know. And I assess this as another 10 to 1. And because these are independent things, you multiply the probabilities together. So the last three, for example, that were similar, if you multiply them together, you'd go 10 cubed to 1 or 1,000 to 1 against chance, you know. And then you keep looking at the number of similarities, and that's how I end up at about 10 to the power of 268 to 1, because there's 268 similarities with an odds of 10 to 1. So in slide 17, I'm showing this third face, which is called face 3, and it's overlaid in the top two pictures, so it has a bit of a more angry looking face, you know, and it also fits very well, as you can see there. You know, the noses match up well and the eyes match up, and then I go through in the book I have 37 points of similarity, and that gives 10 to the 37 to 1 against chance. So even with what we've done so far, we're up to about 10 to the 40th to 1, and that's like winning lotto 3 weeks in a row, you know. So I'll just open the video that's there, and people will be able to see that. And it morphs between this face 2 and face 3, and you can see in the video how clear the change is. The eyes hardly move at all. So anyway, that's very clear. So this is the idea of the proof. Is I'm trying to say that these things shouldn't be so similar to each other. I mean, if you've got images of two different people, like you and a friend of yours, and you tried to overlay them, they wouldn't overlay this closely, because you would have different shaped heads, and you know. Now this is another part then, slide 18, and I'm showing these two little ovals on phase 2 and phase 3, and they're repeated. And you can look at them in the original images. And so I just say, well, these are 10 to 1 against chance again. And the theory I have with these is that it may have been that as the sun angle changed, that it might have moved from one eye pattern to another, and so it looked like the face was slowly looking in a different direction. I can't prove that, but it seems logical that they have these different ovals, and that's the idea of it there. Now, in slide 19, I'm showing that the left side of the crown face has this black line on the left, and on the right there's a very similar black line on this phase 3 as well. So again, there's a repetition of patterns or motifs, that they both got a similar angle in their jawline. And that could be anything again, that could be any other angle, or if these were really random formations, they could have any kind of chin or jaw that you would see of anyone walking down the street, or they could have any other kind of animal that you've ever seen. It could have a giraffe's jaw, or it could just be like any kind of random shape. But I'm only saying that's 10 to 1. But this is even that is really very unlikely. And in slide 20, there's a little shape I'm showing as number A, and this is like it's sort of like an N shape, and it's very similar in shape to the tip of the nose of the main crown face. And this is another repetition, like a repeated pattern again. So I assess this as 10 to 1 against chance as well. So this is the idea. These same patterns keep happening over and over and over again, and each time that they happen, the degrees of freedom mean that a lot of other things should happen. And if this was really high entropy, which means high disorder, then you wouldn't have all these repeated patterns. So slide 21 shows 3 similar eye shapes, that basically the 3 eyes are very similar. They're in a line with each other, about the same size. If this was random, then they could be like, one could be much bigger than the other, one could be vertical, the other is horizontal, one eye could be 10 times bigger than the other, it might have a vertical iris like a cat, there's so many things that it could have been, and yet it just comes out the same again, And this is another odds against chance. I assess this as 100 to 1. If we look at slide 22, the 3 noses are very similar. B shows the nose of the crown face. C shows the nose of phase 3, and the bottom left picture shows where the nose would have been in phase 1. And they're all very similar again. Again, they could have been, if you look at the natural variation in people, that some people have very different noses, and these noses are more similar to each other than just people you would know. If you look at your nose and look at someone else's nose that you would find that there would be more difference than this. So slide 23 shows 3 pairs of alternate eyes or other shapes, and like I said, that the theory, which I can't prove, but it's basically a prediction based on what we might find as these areas are re-imaged, is that these eyes were designed to basically move, So as the sun moved, one eye might become shaded and not visible, and another one becomes more visible, and so the face appears to look more to one side, It might have been designed to move at the seasons, like as the sun moved in different angles in the sky. And again, this shouldn't be happening by random chance, And again, as I said, this is not something that needs to be sort of scary as far as like UFOs and things. If this is real, this was built, and whoever did this died out so long ago that I don't think there was even like algae in the oceans hadn't even evolved, let alone anything. So there's nothing to worry about from that point of view. So in slide 24, there's 3 similar marks that are in the middle of each face. Along the nose, for some reason, there's a mark there, and it repeats on each face. So I assess that as 100 to 1 against chance. But I think it becomes obvious when you look at these things that 10 to 1 or whatever is fairly conservative, because it's very easy to think of many other things that could have been in those positions. And if you did these same figures and you said 1,000 to 1 for each one, you'd be up with a 1 followed by 700 zeros, and that would be like winning lotto 100 weeks in a row. I mean, the odds just get crazy, But anyway, slide 25, it indicates that one seems to have a bit of a smiley face and the other one a frowning face, but the mouths are still very similar. But it's very interesting that it does that, because it seems to be implying some sort of emotional response, that we look at this and we seem to be seeing that they're conveying some sort of emotional expression, which is really particularly odd about it, because how that could possibly be. Anyway, slide 26, I call this high entropy controls, and these are some other images in a valley very near to the Kings Valley. And this is what a valley typically looks like. The walls are smooth, there's no faces, the image on the right has just got random features, and I mean, any of these faces could have just looked like the image on the right, with nothing, and yet you seem to get these same faces over and over again, So that's the idea of that, And this would be high entropy, which means the same as there's high randomness, which means there's no repeated patterns, Okay, slide 27. I also compare, I won't get into this too much to save time, but basically I compare the three faces in the Kings Valley to the Cydonia face, and there's another face on Mars called the Meridiani face, and I overlay them, and they also seem to be the same face as well. So it's like in three separate locations on Mars, they seem to be repeating these same patterns, and one is a mesa, and one is a set of dunes in a crater, and the other three are on a valley wall. So there's no common geological process forming all three. Slide 28 is, I'll just run this little video again, and this shows the Cydonia face, and it's being morphed into the main crown face, and it indicates that there's a lot of similarities. Okay, so that's the first half. We're finished now, so I'll just go on to part two. Now we'll just go to the first slide in part two, or the second slide. Now I'm comparing the crown face and the Meridiani face. The left picture shows the face that's found in a crater, and the right image shows the overlay of the two faces. And as you can see again, they're extremely similar. And I'll just run the video again. So this video is a bit skewed, but you can still see it, and it goes from one to the other. So it shows that these faces are similar again, and again, you shouldn't be able to take a face from the Kings Valley and go to another area of Mars completely, and then find that it just overlays very closely with another face there. So I guess I'm sort of used to this, but it's kind of shocking when people look at this and they see that there's really so much evidence of this, and I say in slide 3 of part 2, I'm saying there's the odds against chance of about 37 to 1, because there's 37 points of similarity. So we're getting up to a very big number of 268, 10 to the power of 268 to 1, which, as I said, is about, assuming 10 million to 1 against winning the lotto, you're looking at, that's about 7 zeros, so you're up to about, what's that, about 30 odd weeks of winning a lotto in a row, which doesn't happen too often. So it's very hard to interpret those odds, which are so large, but then I bring it down from 10 to 1, and I bring it down to the odds of 11 to 10. And if you've ever been to a race course, you'd know 11 to 10 is pretty close to even money, So, I mean, if I say the odds are 11 to 10, I'm basically saying that Mars should be covered in faces. I mean, there should be no place anywhere on Mars where there isn't a face, and the faces would have to be so similar that it would be virtually no difference between them. But if you go 1.1 to the power of 268, and that's still over 100 billion to 1. So, I mean, there's no way that I can see to bring these numbers down to anything that a statistician would say that is possibly random. It's just too many patterns, that are too similar. Okay, so in number 5, I make the point that, and this is pretty obvious when you see the picture, that the Martian faces have more similarities than people do to each other. And if you look at all these different pictures of women that I put up there, and you tried to overlay them, you wouldn't get this same sort of degree of overlap, of similarity. Like, all these women have very different eyes and noses, and you couldn't overlay these faces, And so we couldn't even do this with people on Earth. What I'm showing you can do with these faces on Mars, Number 6, slide 6, is that we need better images. This is a point, a critical point. Obviously, if this is re-imaged more by HiRISE, then we might find even more, because every time in this small valley it's been re-imaged, we've just found more things, Now, in slide 7, I'm showing that face 1 was re-imaged by HiRISE, and this shows that the eyes are a lot more clearer. And I said earlier that, the nose of face 1 seems to have broken off. And if you look carefully at the image in HiRISE, you can see that there's a wavy line where above it seems much smoother, and it looks like that something's broken off there, exactly where the end of the nose is. And then if you look further down, there seems to be a nostril shape further down. So it looks exactly like as if something really did break off there, that the nose broke off. And so that's the idea, that this was a prediction that was borne out very well, because this could easily have been nothing, or there could have been no nostril shapes there, and there could have been no break-off point where it had to be. So do you see what I mean? That's unlikely. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of this isn't new. This was in my book, and my book's about 5 years old. So I mean, this is not breaking news.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is well known in some circles. People who've read this, that it seems very strange that it hasn't been followed up on by NASA and things. But this is what it is. This is the evidence, and people can make up their own mind. Right. Now, in this section, I do another statistical analysis by saying that many features, when this was re-imaged by HiRISE, became clearer when there was an opportunity for them to become less clear. And that's like, so when it was re-imaged at a higher resolution, some of these features could have disappeared. They could have been shown to be just random jumbles of rock, but instead the eyes are clearer, the nose are clearer. And so I consider 35 features became clearer. Basically all the features became clearer. And with a 50-50 odds, like flipping a coin, that's 2 to the power of 35, and you end up with 34 billion to 1 against chance. So again, we've got these huge numbers that shouldn't really be happening statistically, So in slide 9, this shows the eye of the main crown face 2. And this is showing how clear the eye has become. And there's a round shape in the middle, like an iris, and there seems to be folds. It doesn't look very human at all, but if you could imagine this as being like an animal eye, like a cow's eye or something like that, then I go through the different parts. And this is very hard to form from erosion, because if water was flowing down this cliff and somehow had to create these patterns that were horizontal, it just doesn't happen, Instead, what you would have is like a smooth cliff face. So that's that eye. And then the left eye of the main crown face, you can see it again is it shows an oval shape, and this is less clear, but there's still more details there of the eye than there was previously. So this is another validation of the original prediction. Now, in slide 11, I'm showing the nose of the main crown face. Now, this shows how the nose has become more visible. It shows nostril shapes, and it shows that the nose is sticking out, basically. Now, on slide 12, the face 3, which is the face to the right of the main crown face, the right eye, it shows a round shape there that doesn't seem to be a crater or anything like that, and it's just a round face just where the iris should be. And again, this is a similarity that shouldn't be happening randomly, because that round shape could have been anywhere. It could have been like down where the nose was or something like that, you know. But again, it's just in the right place to give this overlay again. And the degrees of freedom means that there could have been another nose there. There could have been another mouth there. There could have been a vertical eye. There could have been a little river there. There could have been any kind of shape. But again, there's another eye. So I mean, all of these things are a repetition of features that make it unlikely to occur by chance. Slide 13, and this is a funny one because it actually took me a long time to see this myself, but it reminds me of, you know how you go to the football and you see sometimes you see an image of like a beer commercial, and they sort of made it that it appears to be sitting up in front of the camera, and you know what I mean? It looks 3D in a way.
That's right.
It's pretty common, you see that. And this face appears to be sitting up. It looks like it's three-dimensional, but I think it's just flat on the cliff. And this face is the same as the other ones, and it's looking off to the right. And I go into the different shapes on it. There's the same kind of crown. It has the same kind of eyes, except that it's looking off to the right, you know. So that's 4 faces in a row now that are really almost identical in the way that they're put together. They're all about the same size. They all have crowns. They all have 2 eyes of about the same size. They all have noses. They all have mouths. And this is what I'm saying in the book. This should not be happening by random chance, you know. Okay, slide 14. This is when HiRISE re-imaged the profile crown face, it's called. And you can see there that the crown stands out a lot more clearly, and the eye marked as D in this picture is particularly clear. And you can even see, it's hard to tell how much of this is real and how much on pixelation, but there appears to be a round iris in the middle of the eye, and even a black pupil in the middle. So again, that could have been anything. That could have been an O shape there, you know, under re-imaging it. But
Sure.
But every time it comes out as being much clearer. And as you can imagine, how eroded this looks, how ancient this must be. This has almost disappeared at the bottom, you know. Okay, so on to slide 15, and this is where it gets even more fascinating, because with the extra resolution of HiRISE, some little images became apparent in the valley, and this is on the other side of the valley. And slide 16 shows this figure, and this is called the sculptor. And the idea is that this might have been the creature that actually made all these things. And you can see his head there is marked as I'm not sure exactly. Hang on. Well, anyways, his head looks over to the right, and it appears to have an arm that points off to the left, and he appears to be holding something. There's also an arm that goes off to the right as well, but it's not shown, and there appears to be legs going down. And this seems to be carved into a very smooth cliff face, and this is very difficult to explain by chance or any kind of geological erosion, because if all of you have is things like wind and rain can't act like a knife. They can't gouge something into a cliff and make lines like a drawing, you know, because they just tend to smooth things out. I mean, practically, I think the only way you could make something like this is if someone was just had a chisel or something like that and were just digging into the rock. And so that's the sculptor. Slide 17, I'm showing the face in a bit more detail, and it shows a nose and mouth and chin. And as you can see, again, it's carved into the cliff face, and all around it, the rock is relatively smooth. But I don't see any way that this could just happen by random chance. And also, this is looking over towards the main crown face. This is on the other side of the valley wall, and again, the big question is what you said at the start. You know, why isn't NASA looking at this? You know, but I think they will in time. You know. Okay, so slide 18. This is kind of interesting. This is a triangle shape, and it has a concave base. Now, this seems to be as if it's like stuck onto the cliff wall, because it isn't actually embedded in the wall as much. You know, it's sticking out. Now, by itself, it's probably not much. It looks a bit like a bell shape. Now, this is on one end of where the faces are, and it seems to like mark like a boundary of where they end. Now, the other end of the valley, where the faces end, is this other slide. Now, this is the same triangle shape. So again, this is a repetition of features, you know, that's happening over and over again. And on this one, it shows there's a small triangle that's marked on this larger triangle, and it has the same shape again. So it's like a scale model of the larger triangle, again with a concave base. Now, this is unlikely to occur by chance. This could have been any kind of shape. It could have been a rectangle, it could have been a circle, it could have been a five-sided figure, and yet it's the same triangle shape with a concave base again. And also it's sticking out from the cliff, you know. Now, slide 20, I've marked here. A shows how it protrudes from the cliff. B shows wavy lines that appear to be like hair, because there's another face that's actually on this triangle, and the face shape's outlined there. C shows the base of the triangle is concave. D shows a similar triangle with a concave base. So I've marked all those quite clearly. Now, one name I suggested for this is called a coin face, because it looks like a face in profile on a coin, like the Queen's picture on a coin or something, you know. So again, it's unlikely to occur by chance. You know, here we have these two triangles very similar in shape on opposite ends of where these faces are. You get the impression that it's becoming absurd, you know. I mean, the idea that the wind and the rain did all this, you know, or that micrometeorites fell from space and like little dots, like a stiletto sort of thing, created all these shapes, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but if you try and prove that something is artificial, you can't really do it. But if you try to prove that the natural explanations don't work, then it becomes obvious pretty quick. Okay, now also make a point, and this is a point that's kind of important to make. It's one thing to look at the evidence, and the evidence there is quite substantial, but it's also important if you can take a step back and think, well, what does it all mean? You know, like, why is someone making three faces in a row? Like, why is there another crown face looking off to the right? Why are there these two triangles? You know, like, what is it all about? You know, like, it seems to be showing a comprehensive message. My theory, which is kind of strange, is I think this was an amusement park. It's one of the few things that survived on Mars all this time ago, but I don't think this was built as a message to us. I think it was built for entertainment, basically. The people came here, like Mount Rushmore, and they just came there to look at these sculptors, you know. And that's why it seems a bit comical and a bit fanciful in the shapes, you know. It's not meant to be solemn. And as I get onto a little bit later, you'll see that these ideas start creeping in that appear to be some kind of humour involved. So slide 21 shows a fish shape. Now, again, you know, if someone was living there, then there was probably something like fish in the sea that they ate, and so this implies a whole ecosystem of what they ate, you know. And I say in the book that this can also be regarded as being like two fish that are on top of each other, like two fish that have been caught. And on the left, most people see this very clearly. You can see that the head with the eye, and on the right, you can see the tail of the fish. Now, very close to that, and looking in the opposite direction, is another fish, which seems to have been eaten because it's got like bone-like shapes, you know. Of course, it begs the question is, why would their fish look like our fish, you know? But there it is, it's on the cliff, it's very near to the other one, it's got an eye, it's got a mouth, it's got a fin shape, and it's on this cliff right next to all this other stuff. But you can probably appreciate, we see all this when we're researching, and it's very hard to not be convinced by it, I mean, it's one thing to be skeptical to some degree, but the amount of evidence here is just astronomical. Slide 23 shows the what might be the partially eaten fish, and just to the right of that, there's these other shapes that also look like fish that are very heavily eroded, and they look like they've nearly disappeared over time because they're so old, And I've actually found another couple of fish further up the valley, which I haven't included here. So, slide 24. This is really quite bizarre, and I think this was, when I found this, I thought it was so incredible. It just took me about a day to get over this. Just how incredible I thought this was, and this seems to show a reclining figure. The head is etched into the cliff, and again you have the same argument with the sculptor as to how the wind and the rain could etch this complex face with a nose and eyes and mouth and a three-dimensional light-shaped crown into the cliff, and then extending from the base of the neck, it's like a spine going back along this area, and then there's a symmetrical shape like a pelvis, and all of that connects. The fascinating thing is, like, on the left, it appears to be an arm that's draping down this ravine, down to the bottom of the ravine. So there's shapes that look like knuckles that are on the bottom of the ravine. So it's like the face has been set up to put its arm down, like it's reaching down to the bottom of the ravine, and it's got its other arm to the side. It's like a joke. You see what I mean? It seems funny. And the idea that there could be a joke like this, and this is why I think it was an amusement park, I mean, here we're seeing not only intelligent design possibly of these features, we're seeing emotions, and we're seeing some sort of idea of humour, which shouldn't be happening on another planet 3 billion years ago, So 25 goes through this in some detail, slide 25, but on this picture where I've got A, basically, that's another face. It's like this reclining face is looking down on it. B shows the knuckles, C shows the arm. D, where it shows D, there's up to another 7 faces there. That's if you don't have enough crown faces, and they've all got crowns as well. So there's the repetition, all of them seem to have the same kind of hat. But this is very heavily eroded, that they all look like faces. E shows a mouth. The mouth is very similar to the sculptor. F shows a nose that's very similar to the other ones. G shows an eye that's similar to the other ones. H shows the crown that's similar to the other ones. K shows this spine, and M shows this symmetrical shape. J shows the right arm, and you can even see some possible fingers on that. And on the right of that, there's another face with a crown on it, as if we didn't have enough of them. And this one seems to be looking down over the valley. And the reason this is in colour is because parts of the images are done in colour. And this seems to have the same crown as the other one. So they both got the same crown shape. They both got about the same kind of eyes and nose and mouth again. This one seemed to have its arm draped around, which is another sort of a humorous sort of way of looking at it. And just in this image, there could be up to 8 faces, all very similar to each other. Now, on slide 26, this is what the reclining face is looking down on. This is yet another face. This one is partially buried, and it shows the 2 eyes are the main thing that are visible here. On slide 26. Slide 27 shows these are outlined, so it shows where the 2 eyes are. And I go through where the jawline is and the nose and the mouth and everything. And again, this is very similar again to the other crowned faces. Now, there's not much more to go now, but just to the right of that crowned figure, that coloured crowned figure, there's another crowned face, and this is shown again, and again it's got the same flat-topped head like a crown, and it's got two eyes, a nose, and a mouth again. Now, this is getting increasingly eroded, this part of the cliff, and so it becomes much more dubious as to whether a face might appear by random chance, you know. But it does seem clear enough, and again, it's right next to the other one. Slide 29 shows where I've outlined it, you know, and there it is, you know, it's yet another crown face, you know. And again, I mean, even if you looked at the repetition of the hats, you can imagine how many different hats that you've seen in your life, and that they could all have different hats, they could all have different random hats, you know, and even that would be unlikely that they would all just happen by random chance to have the same hats. Slide 30 shows this crown face that's overlooking the reclined one. That shows it a bit more clearly. It shows the rounded hat and the face. Above this, there's another crown face. It's not so easy to see. I outlined it in the next slide, but just above this one, there's another one that's looking down at the same direction, and it's got a crown as well. In slide 31, I show it outlined, and there's another face. It's another crown face, and it's looking in the same direction. We're up to 32. I think there's only about 40 slides, so 32 shows a close-up of this face again, and again, it's less clear because this is more highly eroded, this area, but you know, it's, you know, why are there all these crowns, you know, all these faces? This one has similar noses and eyes to the other one. 33 shows a second profile face, and this is underneath the crown figure. This one was also very hard to see, and it almost stands out in 3D. So you've got the two eyes and looking to the right, and in slide 34 I show it outlined. This is very highly eroded as well. But again, you know, there's another one again, you know, and basically from there I summarise and I say I think low entropy is demonstrated by so many similarities that they're not random formations, you know, that there are just too many faces that happen over and over again. But similar eyes, similar noses, similar mouths, they've all got crowns, they all seem to fit together. Some of them overlap with each other, so it's like a coherent pattern. Even some of them seem to have an emotional sort of feel to them that's similar to other ones, you know. And that wind and rain are randomising forces, you know, they should just produce random smooth shapes on cliffs, and also many of these faces are very highly ordered, but right next to them there is an extreme amount of erosion. So the same wind and rain or whatever it is, it shouldn't be able to create so much disorder right next to these faces and then just create these faces at the same time, you know, like even just meters away. And this is why I say that artificiality is proven by it, you know. So slide 36 is a question people can ask themselves: what's supposed to happen about it, you know? Like, is it being ignored? It's very hard to tell, you know. Now, I just making the point that there's the ExoMars rover that recently blasted off to Mars. I think it left about 2 weeks ago. That it could have gone there. One of the landing sites that they selected as a candidate site for it to go was southern Isitis crater, and this is only like 20 kilometres or so from the Kings Valley. So if they'd sent that rover to that landing site, it could have just gone up this river and got to this area. So I mean, that's how close, you know, that's how doable it is for this mission to occur, for people to actually go there. All it would take is to make a rover go to an established landing site that was already a candidate, and then just go from there. So in slide 38, I just show, this is a high-rise map, and it shows where the Kings Valley is, and then it shows where this little pin shows where the Mars exploration rover site, the candidate site, was, and it just shows how close they are together. and I just make the point, slide 39, that we could land there, and that's the basis of it. I came up with this term called advenology, which comes from the Latin, which means migrant, alien, or traveller. And the reason I came up with that name is it's about the only Latin name from the Latin root that's left that means that. And so I thought, well, why not create a name that doesn't have any baggage from any other sort of science fiction novels or any other sort of theories, and just says, if we call this as a place name, and it might be changed later, but if we call this advenology, then we can, from the Latin root, a name for this race is the advenum, which just means alien or traveller. And that's the name I refer to them as, but it's really just a name so we can call them something, And then I make a list of all the different scientific fields that could be interested in studying this. So, I mean, really, the idea of a Martian colony is quite plausible, and a lot of different scientific fields would be interested in it. So that's basically it, I think.
Well, thank you very, very much for sharing those slides with us, and obviously making this interview a bit more into a conference. I really, really appreciate you giving us your time to do that, because I think if I had interviewed you, it wouldn't have been as good as as you going over the slides, because this is your work basically. This is your own mini conference right now, which is great. You talked earlier on as well. I mean, I know we're almost out of time, but you talked earlier on as well about that you feel that whoever left these there have long gone, but but then again they may not. They may be, their ancestors may, their future generations may live on, but some other part of the universe, and they've how do we know that they've long gone?
Well, that's the thing, you can get into this idea of like a Star Trek universe where everyone happens to look like humans. I mean, they did it in the show just to make it easier for actors to dress up, But it may well be that if somebody sent out probes that tried to terraform different planets and seeded their DNA, that all of these planets are evolving with very similar DNA, and eventually they're going to meet each other.
It's possible.
And
yeah.
And I just noticed, and this is literally yesterday, people would have seen this, that Stephen Hawking was proposing a rocket ship basically to go at 20% of the speed of light and get to other planets very quickly using laser propulsion. Now, exactly the same kind of thing could have been done by whoever did this. They could have sent a very small spaceship on it with DNA and some sort of artificial intelligence that basically was sent out, and they could have sent thousands and thousands of these things in all directions to go to all different planets. And then they just arrived here, they built a larger version of themselves, and then they started terraforming the planet, and they just seeded it, and that was their objective. And NASA has actually thought of doing the same thing.
It's possible, isn't it? I mean, do you think we'll get to see man land on Mars in our lifetime?
Well, I think this will cause people to go there much quicker, because the sheer amount of curiosity involved in people wanting to know what's going on there, and you can see the amount of evidence that there is. As people learn more and more about this and realise that this is something that appears to be real, and that cameras could be sent there, and a rover could go up this valley and it could show these things that look like real alien artifacts, and that it's very safe, and then next thing you know, scientists are going to want to go there, and they say, well, look, we want funding to go there and study these things, and next thing you know, there's a colony, and then other people go, and
Well, I guess the movie...
That's where I think it'll go.
Well, Ridley Scott did a good movie just recently, The Martian, with, I was going to say Jason Bond there, but that's his acting name, with Matt Damon, and that was a great film, that was. But again, it's not, it's based on some facts, but it's all obviously, it's predictive stuff. What would you say, Greg, is the most important message of your work?
Well, I always took the attitude with this that it's a mainstream scientific field, that at some point, that the mainstream scientific organisations like NASA and people like that are going to realise that this is going to bring a lot of money their way. I mean, imagine the extra funding that will go into this, you know, to create a base on Mars much earlier than it otherwise would have happened. And I make a list of scientists that could be interested in going to Mars that could also be pushing for funding. Anthropologists, for example, to study what the society was like, you know. Just in the Kings Valley alone, this whole idea of why these faces were made and why they're looking at each other. Then you've got zoologists, you know, who study animals, and you've got these fish on the walls. Sociologists who are looking at the sort of the psychology of how aliens could be showing humour, like in the arm reaching down. Archaeologists is a pretty obvious one. Historians of trying to work out the history of it, you know. It's just there are so many scientists that would have to get together to really understand this properly. And digging up fossils, you know, if there's fossils there, and how these things were constructed, engineers would want to know about that. I mean, I've never seen any real downside to this. I've never seen anything to be afraid of. I've never seen anything to avoid going there, you know, because it's just so old, you know.
Absolutely.
And that's why I've always looked at it. You know, I've looked at it as a thing that I think it's going to be very good for humanity, because we will go there and we will explore space much sooner than we otherwise would, you know.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the real message to take from this, you know.
And your website?
Well, ultor.org is my main one, ultor.org. That shows some of the original crown faces. And as I said, people can download the book. The book needs updating. Some of the pictures that are in the book turned out to be natural formations. And I'm quite open about that, because it's a predictive process, you know, that you can't guarantee that they all end up being correct. But everything in the Kings Valley has pretty much ended up being accurate. So they don't all have to be artificial. It only has to be one, you know. And in the Kings Valley, there is certainly more than one.
Well, I would just like to say, Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you coming on, and you know, you're doing this work a lot of justice. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay. Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.